A good vach, my pal, Shavua Tov, a good week to you. Who's going to be first? Who's going to arrive first? Whoa. Who is going to help us light up the darkness by commenting where you're tuned? I can't light this match. Here we go. By telling us where you're tuning in from. Who's in the house on a Saturday night? All right, my dear friends. Who had a great Shabbos? Who's tuning in? Where are you in from? I love being together with you on Saturday night. Here we go. Venus Black is first. Tuning in from Stockton, California. James Roth in the house from Indianapolis. You know, before I go any further, and Christo in Lubbock, Texas, great to see you all. Before I go any further, let's take a moment to pray. I just came out of Shabbos and heard that there was one of these terrible shootings in Thailand, and that some soldier, disgruntled person killed 2 people, then went to a mall and killed 21 more while streaming and taking selfies. My head is exploding with how awful this is. Let's pray for the families who've lost loved ones to this horrific event. And I don't know when this is going to stop, but please, God, comfort the people who've lost loved ones in this shooting, and just open eyes around the world that we've got to find a better way. And whatever's causing all these shootings and people, alienated, isolated, and seeking attention by killing people and doing it in a public way, and using these tools, social media, live streaming, for murder, for bloodshed. It's just beyond awful. And I don't know what we can do, but at least we can use this same tool for light, for holiness, and counteract in that way. And if more becomes in our power to do it, to prevent these kind of horrific killings, then let's do that too. It's just awful to come out of Shabbos and hear that kind of news. So we're praying the people of Thailand, particularly the ones who lost loved ones in this horrific shooting that happened. All right. We're about to go into page 36 of Berachos. This is AT Daily. We are working our way through the Talmud. This is show number 35 of 2,711, God willing. We're in Tractate 1 of the Talmud, Berachos, blessings, and now we're in chapter 6. The first few chapters were about the requirements and constitution of the daily recital of the Shema, taking on the yoke of heaven, the yoke of the commandments, and then the Amidah, the daily prayer, and its requirements. And now we've moved into blessings. And we're talking about, we established yesterday actually, that one is not permitted to enjoy something in this world, particularly food, without reciting a blessing first. Some foods are difficult to categorize, and that makes it tricky to understand what blessing we say before we enjoy that food. So we're going to get into that tonight. Tonight's show is going to be a little bit on the short side. I've got to go. There's an event at my kid's school, and I'm going to that tonight. But first, let me say that this week that we have now entered, so this is our Daf Yomi cycle, our Talmud cycle. Most of you are aware that there's a Torah portion cycle that gets repeated each year. We read the entire Torah every year, and there's a Torah portion for every week. So when we came out of Shabbos, now it's a new week, right? This is a weekday in the Jewish calendar. Come out of Shabbat Saturday night, and we begin the week. And this new week, the Torah portion is Yisro or Yitro, the more Israeli pronunciation. And that's amazing because this is the Torah portion in which God appears to the entire Jewish people, all the children of Israel, at Mount Sinai, and gives to them, and for the benefit of the whole world, the 10 Commandments. It was the single greatest moment in human history when God appeared, God's self revealed God's self to 2 million people at once. In fact, in this past Torah portion that we came out of, when the children of Israel crossed the sea was parted for them. We have a tradition that actually every body of water around the world split, so that people around the world knew something miraculous was happening, but they didn't know what. Soon thereafter, when God appeared at Mount Sinai, not everyone, experienced, and not everyone was there present, but the rumblings of that event were available to everyone around the world. Everyone knew that something incredible was happening, and the teachings which were given to the Jewish people on behalf of the whole world, right, began at Mount Sinai. We're still sharing that Torah today. Here we're doing it on Facebook Live, on AT Daily. And the Torah portion is called Yitro, Jethro in English. Who was Yitro or Jethro? Moses' father-in-law, not a Jew, right? Moses' father-in-law was not Jewish. And in fact, he was a great priest, familiar with every form of idolatry in the world. He was a great seeker, somebody who was really a spiritual person and a seeker, and had investigated every form of religion available at that time, which is to say every kind of idolatry, right? He was a great, great priest of these idolatrous religions. And when he heard how the children of Israel came out of Egypt, and with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, God did that and performed miracles for us, he realized that there is only one God, and God is true, and he came to join Moses and the children of Israel and became a Jew. And so it's this wonderful, tradition that's now been instilled in the Torah forever, that the Torah portion, which includes the 10 Commandments and the appearance of God to the Jewish people at Sinai, is named after somebody who was not Jewish at the time that happened. What do we learn from that? That these teachings are for everybody. The Torah benefits everybody. Not everybody is bound in the same way. Not all Jews have to observe the same commandments. There are different commandments that only apply to a high priest, for example, or to a king, that don't apply to the average Jew. And there are many commandments that only apply to Jews that do not apply to non-Jews. But the knowledge of God, to know God, K-N-O-W, the knowledge of God is for everybody. Okay. So we get into this page now, Daf 36, Lamed Vav, in Berachos. And what we're looking at is food blessings in tricky situations. So when we start this page, we're looking at this question that comes up about olive oil, right? So we know that in terms of wine is a special food. And even though it's made from grapes, it does not have the same blessing that we say over grapes. When we eat grapes, we say, now I'm teaching it, even though I'm not eating it, so I can say the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri ha'etz. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who makes the fruit of the tree. But when those grapes get turned into wine, and we drink wine, so then we finish that blessing with borei pri hagefen, who makes the fruit of the vine, a special blessing over wine. Olives get the blessing borei pri ha'etz, the fruit of the tree. When we turn olives into olive oil, they do not get their own special olive oil blessing, even though olive oil is a very important food. If you think about the Middle East, the Mediterranean, and how many foods depend on olive oil, wealth was often measured, in olive trees and the ability to produce olive oil. Olive oil was a very, very important substance, but it did not receive its own blessing. And the rabbis discuss why. Why is that? What is special about wine that's different from olive oil? And a lot of reasons were given, but the net result is olive oil gets the same blessing as olives. This is not true of all things. So if you have a grain product, for instance, if you have wheat flour, right, and you just mix it with some bread and maybe kind of a paste or a dough, you're in a hurry, you eat that, right? It didn't become bread, so it's a grain product. And this applies to a muffin, right? So a muffin that's made with wheat or other kinds of grain has the blessing who makes Berei Minei Mizonos. That the blessing ends with Berei Minei Mizonos, who makes different kinds of nourishment. But if that grain becomes bread, so now we get into a special category, Hamotzi Min Haaretz, right? The one who brings bread forth from the earth. So bread and wine, special status, right? And for over blessings, we have special status for bread and for wine. And a meal that has bread in it is going to receive the full grace after the meals. But if you only eat a muffin, so then you have a much shorter bread blessing afterwards called Al Michya. And then if you eat something else, like, if you just, for instance, if you just drink water, right? If you drink water, so then you're going to say a blessing by whose word, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, by whose word everything comes into being. And afterwards, who makes the diverse species, who makes different things, Berei Nafshos. Okay, we're not actually getting into the blessings after so much today. That was a digression. But now we have this idea that, let's say you eat bread with honey. Honey, very important product, right? And honey is special in many ways. I believe that honey never goes bad, right? I believe not long ago, honey was found in a pyramid in Egypt that was thousands of years old, and it was edible. It was amazing. I would not have wanted to be the one who tasted it, but it was edible. So honey is in that category of shehakol, by whose word everything, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, by whose word everything comes into being. Bread, as we just said, gets the bread blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who brings bread forth from the earth. If you eat bread with honey, which blessing do you say? And so here we have the principle that you make a blessing for the primary food, and then that exempts all of the secondary foods in the meal. And that's why, we say if we're going to have a meal, we're going to have some bread with it, we say blessing over the bread, and that takes care of the whole meal. We don't then go and say blessings over all the individual foods while we are eating. Salt, interesting question. Is salt food? Answer, we get benefit from salt, right? And there are times when a person will even eat salt by itself. One of my kids likes to eat salt by itself. And a person who, for whatever situation, they actually need salt. Okay, so they might eat salt. So when we eat salt by itself or salt water, we'll say the same blessing that we would say over water by itself. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, by whose word everything comes into being. What about pepper? Pepper's an interesting question. Now here we're talking about pepper in Talmudic times, and they're discussing the long pepper, not bell peppers, right? Not green peppers and red peppers, like bell peppers, right? That you chop it up and put it in a salad. That is clearly a vegetable. But the long pepper, which is used as a spice, and then you could imagine the kind of pepper, that you put on pizza, right? Very spicy. So if you eat that by itself, there's a dispute. Rav Sheshet says if you eat pepper by itself, you would say shehakol, the same as salt, right? Blessed are you, Lord our God, rule the universe, by whose word everything comes into being. But Rava says no blessing at all if you eat pepper by itself. What is Rava's reasoning? He looks at a practice that existed in Talmudic times, but not today. In Talmudic times, people would chew either pepper or ginger on Yom Kippur. Now, everyone knows, or most everyone knows, that on Yom Kippur, right, it's the most important fast day of the year. Some call it the holiest day of the year. I think Shabbat is the holiest day of the year. And thank God it comes every 7 days. But Yom Kippur, its holiness is extreme, and it's the day on which the whole nation atones. And when the Torah says you must afflict yourselves. And what does afflict yourselves mean? It's various definitions. You can't wash, no marital relations, you can't wear leather shoes. But most important, No eating of any kind. No drinking, no eating, no water, no nothing. From sundown on Erev Yom Kippur, the day before Yom Kippur, until nighttime, the day of Yom Kippur itself. So, how is it possible that people could chew on a pepper or a ginger? Back then, it was just thought it was something, that would take care of the breath. You wouldn't have such bad breath, right? Because often when people are fasting and afflicting themselves all day and in close quarters in a hot place, as it could be at that time of year in the Holy Land. So just to kind of relieve themselves a little bit, they weren't eating the pepper, they would just chew it, right? And so they could do that and not make a blessing over it because they weren't eating it. And so Rav is saying, because you could chew it on Yom Kippur, that tells us that it's not food. And since it's not food, so then even if you eat it and swallow it, you're not eating food. It's not something that people typically eat as food. And therefore, we won't say a bracha, a blessing over it, because it's not food. I just want to repeat, that was a practice then, not now. The law now is very clear. We do not chew peppers or ginger or anything else on Yom Kippur. Some people have the custom of taking some cloves and sticking them into an orange and just smelling it. And that kind of helps them get through that difficult fast. But they're only smelling, not eating or chewing. And so how do we resolve this dispute between Rav Sheshet and Rava? Rav Sheshet says we say shehakol, by whose word everything comes into being, when we eat pepper by itself, right? This long pepper, the spicy pepper, not the vegetable pepper. And Rava, who says it's not food at all. So Rabbi Meir comes and says, okay, the difference between them is that Rav Sheshet was talking about these peppers when they're still moist, when they're fresh, when they're much more like a food, like a vegetable. So then, because you can eat it and get some sustenance from it, it hasn't really become a spice yet. That's when we say a blessing before eating it. But once it's dried and sort of put into the spice market, so then it's not food, and then we wouldn't have to say the blessing over it. We also spent a lot of time in this page on caper bushes. Caper bushes. I confess I'm not sure when we're talking about caper bushes and caper berries, is that the same as capers? I'm not sure. I don't think so. But anyway, there's a bush. Somebody will let me know about this. But there's a bush called the caper bush that does grow in the Holy Land. And what's interesting about that bush is that a lot of it is edible. And so there are berries on the bush that are edible. And over them, we say the blessing like we would over cherries, the fruit of the tree. Right? I just want to confirm that. Berei pri ha'etz, right? Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who brings forth fruit from the tree, or who creates fruit from the tree, who creates fruit of the tree. So that's over the berries of the caper bush. But if we eat the flowers or the leaves or the young fronds of the caper bush, so then we say, Borei pri ha'adamah, blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who makes the fruit of the earth. That fruit of the earth is the blessing we say over vegetables, like all vegetables, things that come out of the ground, whether they're zucchinis, which contains the seed, or lettuce, which is the leaf of the plant, or carrot, which is the root of the plant. All of those are going to be fruit of the earth. But this caper bush contains on itself both fruit of the earth and fruit of the tree. Tricky situation. Another tricky situation that came up on this page is heart of palm, right? We're so disjoint, we're so disconnected, right, from the earth and from agricultural society. That for us, what is heart of palm? It's just something that comes in a can. People don't know what that is. So what is a heart of palm? Heart of palm is these soft branches that come out at certain times from certain kinds of palm trees. And it's mostly like a membrane around that branch, which is soft. Okay, so what is the blessing for that, right? So for the heart of palm, you might think it's like a vegetable or it's like a tree, but it's unclear. So we end up with shakol. We say by whose word everything comes into being, because it's not a fruit and it's not a vegetable, and it's part of the tree itself. And so our sages decided that that was going to be by whose word everything comes into being. And there's a big discussion about that, about the question of, are these trees being grown for that? Is it expected, or is it kind of a side product? And that's a little bit of how we get into that discussion. But the outcome is that a heart of palm is by whose word everything comes into being. Tomorrow, with God's help, we'll meet again and we'll get into the 5 species, a little bit more about grains and what happens when something is a bread or is not a bread, or something. We say the blessing over the primary food, but when it comes to grain, even a little bit can become the primary food in an object, in a dish, as it were, in a cooked food. All right, my friends, I would say that the takeaway from today is that our sages are going to spend a lot of time. We're going to spend a bit of time determining exactly what is food and what isn't, and what we say about our society and our culture and our people when we determine that a thing is a food or is not a food. You can imagine that if you hear about things that things that people eat in other cultures that we would not eat, these questions are not simple, right? But it was very important for the sages to determine which category and which blessing we're saying. And this is tricky stuff. I mean, at this point, Nina and I have been, religious for quite a while. But some of these foods, it's just hard to remember. Luckily, we live in a time when we all have smartphones, and when you're not sure what blessing to say over a particular food, you can Google it. The Orthodox Union has an extensive site that tells you exactly which blessing to say before and which after. But let us admire and learn from the passion of our sages, who are doing all of this work to really live out this idea that we must not enjoy anything in this world without thanking our Creator and our benefactor, right? Our benefactor for giving us all this food. And that's why we say 3 times a day in the Ashrei prayer, and when we, it's Psalm 145, but when we get to a line late in Psalm 145, we're supposed to say with special focus and intensity, you open your hand to God. You open your hand and satisfy the needs of every living thing, right? So every living thing is created, and its food is created for it too. And we can just take that for granted, or we can get wonder and admiration and gratitude for it every time we eat something. All right, my friends, let me just check and see. I'm going to move this a little closer to me. If there are any questions, let me know if there's anything that I should pay attention to. I love how many people I'm just scanning right here. How many people are tuning in from Alabama and Oregon and Florida. This Christo must have said in response to what I said earlier, we're praying tonight. I came out of Shabbat and heard the news that one of these horrific killings happened in Thailand, where a disgruntled soldier went and killed 21 people in a mall while streaming on Facebook and taking selfies of himself. I mean, this, the self-involvement and arrogance and just this horrific uncare for life and what life is and how beautiful life can be, and to just, aggrandize himself and get on social media, God forbid, by killing people. We're just so disgusted. And we pray for the families of everyone who lost someone tonight, and the people who are injured. May they be healed. Please, God, heal the people who are injured all around the world in all these travesties. Everyone who is suffering from this coronavirus. I mean, there's so much going on in the world. May the people who are ailing receive the healing they need. And let's say amen. May the people who are mourning receive the comfort that they need. And we say amen. All right, my friends, thank you for tuning in. Tomorrow is Sunday. Thinking about my day tomorrow, I suspect that I'll be on, with God's help, late afternoon Pacific time, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock approximately Pacific time. Sending you big love from Los Angeles. May we all dance together. The Messianic times when these kinds of murders and sicknesses will be no more.